This episode is brought to you by Next Step Navigators, where you can take your ADHD coach to college with you. Next Step Navigators can support you from any campus. Visit nextstepnavigators.com.
Sometimes it gets too extreme. Like if I'm giving a presentation and I look around the room and people are not smiling or look like they're paying attention, I get really nervous because I feel like, oh, I'm not connecting. What can I do? And I start to sort of change too much, of my behavior.
For many of us with neurodivergent brains, putting our unique abilities to work can feel like an uphill climb. So, how do we turn our challenges into strengths? And what lessons can we learn from nature about firing up our potential and staying focused? We're digging into these questions with Jeff Karp, a Harvard professor, ADHD-er, and author of LIT, Life Ignition Tools. Use nature's playbook to energize your brain, spark ideas, and ignite action. He'll share insights from his own journey and cutting-edge research. That's coming up on episode 231. I'm Emily Kircher-Morris, and this is the Neurodiversity Podcast.
What is neurodiversity? You see the world differently.
Autism spectrum.
Gifted.
Complexities that are inherently inside.
ADHD.
Dysgraphia.
Tourette's.
All brains are different.
You are exactly what this world needs.
This is the
Neurodiversity
Podcast.
I want to give a shout out to all of the clinicians who are out there supporting neurodivergent clients. Creating neurodiversity affirming spaces in therapy is so important because, let's be honest, many of the old ways of therapizing neurodivergent people did more harm than good. On Friday, July 12th, we are hosting a live, free, continuing education training for mental health clinicians called Foundations of Neurodiversity Affirming Therapy. We are accredited by the National Board of Certified Counselors, and you can earn 1.5 hours of continuing education by attending. There will also be a recording made available, so even if you can't attend live, you can still participate and grab a certificate for your continuing education hours. You can register for the event by clicking on the link in the show notes, or you can head on over to neurodiversity.university and sign up there. My conversation with Jeff Karp is up next.
Previously on the Neurodiversity Podcast.
When I was a kid, oftentimes you didn't find what you were really good at until you were like 14, 15, 16, even older. But now we expect kids to find that area of excellence when they're really quite young. And the way they tell us that they're not ready for that is by looking like they're unmotivated and unwilling to try new things because they're afraid they're not going to be successful in them. And we tend to want to love the kid who we want that kid to be as opposed to the kid who was right in front of us telling us what they already love to do.
That's episode 171. Find it wherever you get your podcasts.
Jeff Karp is my guest today. Jeff is a distinguished Harvard professor and biotech entrepreneur. His recent book, LIT, Life Ignition Tools, Use Nature's Playbook to Energize Your Brain, Spark Ideas, and Ignite Action, pulls from his life experiences with ADHD to help other neurodivergent people. And so, Jeff, thank you so much for being here today.
Oh, it's so wonderful to be here. Thank you for the opportunity.
Like so many neurodivergent people, your experiences as a child at school really influenced how you saw and understood yourself. You were diagnosed with ADHD in middle school. So I'm curious, what was life like before that? And how did gaining that diagnosis impact the way that you understood yourself growing up?
Yeah, thank you for that question. Well, when I was in the second grade, I was just really not getting anything. It was really a struggle for me. I'd sit at the back of the class just feeling demoralized, not connecting with anybody. I couldn't understand anything that was being taught. My mom tried flashcards. She tried phonics. She tried everything, and nothing really worked. And I really just felt like an alien, like I was sort of put into an environment that was just so foreign to me and that I just didn't belong. But I so desperately wanted to connect, and I really wanted to. I think that's what made it really difficult. And at the end of the second grade, my teacher, Mr. Steadwell, he pulled my parents aside and said he thought that I should repeat the second grade. And my parents negotiated for me to spend time with tutors in the summer so that I could catch up. And then, there was an agreement that then I would go on to the third grade if I could indeed, make some progress. And so all my classmates went on vacation, and here I am in summer school. And I would go in every day, and, they would read passages and ask me questions, and, I would give answers. But there was one day in particular, and I remember it as if it was yesterday, where I went in and they asked me a question that they had never asked before, and it literally changed my life. I went in, they read a passage and asked me some questions, and I gave answers as I normally did on any other day. But on this particular day, they looked me in the eye after I gave my answers, and they said, "How did you think about that?" And nobody had ever asked me that question before. And it was literally like a light bulb moment, like a flash of awareness. I was like, wait a moment, I can think about my thinking. I can actually think about what I'm going to say before saying it. Like I felt like I was almost just streaming up into that point. Anything that came into my mind, any action, just very impulsive with everything. And nothing really changed dramatically right away. But what happened was I started to bring this new awareness to everything. I started to notice patterns in my own thoughts and connect my thoughts to my actions. Like I'd be like, well, why did I just act that way? And so I started observing patterns in other people. I also started to figure out how I actually learned most effectively, which was asking questions. I realized anytime that I asked a question, that for a few moments afterwards, I'd be able to hyper-focus on what was being said. And that would imprint in my mind. I could connect it with other things that I knew, and I could recall it later. And so I started to realize that my learning was not going to happen generally while I was sitting, in a chair at a desk with the teacher at the front, putting stuff on a blackboard or whatever it was. But that my learning would happen after class when I went up to the teacher and asked as many questions as I possibly could. And, I started to realize questions could even slow down a conversation or could redirect a conversation, and just like the power of questions. And so that's really where LIT began, was developing tools for survival, which I eventually started to use as I progressed to truly thrive.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love what you're saying, because as a clinician, when I work with my counseling clients, one of the biggest, most powerful tools that I have really is leveraging that metacognition, which is exactly what you're talking about there, right?
Yeah.
The ability to pause and think about thinking, to reflect on exactly what's happening internally, and then adapt based on that. And I do think that sometimes we forget how important having that very explicit instruction about what that can look like, and building that sense of self-evaluation to lead to self-regulation can be. You kind of happened upon it and kind of figured it out and were able to put it to use in your life.
Yeah, I think regardless of where anybody is on the neurodiversity spectrum, it is unbelievably powerful being able to think about thinking and to redirect our thoughts and our actions. Because when we do that, when we essentially move away from this sort of like animalistic impulsiveness that I think, we all, have different battles with, on a daily basis, when we truly can sort of let a thought sort of come into our minds, we assess it, and then it goes, or there's an impulse to take a particular action, and we just sort of let it simmer, and eventually it kind of passes through our minds. It creates this huge win for the day. Like it's so empowering. It feels so right when we are intentional in, to me, just like intention is just about the moments. And when I started being able to think about thinking, it just totally lit me up. This idea that I could change my actions, I could divert my thoughts, I could let my thoughts just sort of leave my mind. I could start trying to figure out, like, how can I fit in? I mean, that was a really big part of my life, I'd say, in elementary school, was just trying to figure out how can I fit in. And it took a while. It took a lot of sort of observation and pattern recognition and trying things on and realizing certain things were not me, but I could see the evolution happening, like I was on the path.
You know, educators have such an influence on their students, as you experienced that summer after second grade. But often we don't even know what those little things are that might influence kids. What were some of the other experiences throughout your schooling that really worked for you? Or were there other things that just worked against you that you wish you could have changed now that you are able to reflect as an adult?
Well, if I kind of describe a little bit more about what happened, let's say after the time in between the second and the third grade, one of the things that was really transformative for me was my family moved out to the country, and I'm talking like real country land. We had a farmer's field in our backyard, a sheep farm beside us, buffalo farm across the road. Our driveway was 1,000 feet long. There was a creek that ran across it. I'd wake up in the middle of the night. There'd be a pack of wolves on the front lawn, kind of heading over to the sheep farm for a midnight snack, perhaps. And to me, that was transformative, because I really believe that, neurodiversity is that there's a purpose to it. And that I think the education system of today has, it's almost like, how can you get people to be more normal? How can you get people to fit into this mold? But I can't stop thinking about how neurodiversity would have been such an asset back 10, 20,000 years ago, when we were all hunter-gatherers, and being able to see things in nature and patterns that would really help the tribe survive. And I think that there's really something special about being out in nature, especially if you're someone who is on the neurodiverse kind of spectrum, wherever that may land, that there is this deeper connection that perhaps, we can more quickly attain and see things that maybe others won't as quickly see. And I just immediately also felt deep connection and solace when I got off the bus, in the third grade, for example, and I'd been struggling all day trying to figure out how to fit in. I'd be literally exhausted and just kind of be ruminating. And as I walked along this 1,000-foot driveway carved through a forest, it was so calming to me. And it was like I felt like I was being hugged by nature. And so I think, to me, that was one thing that really helped to sustain me. It fueled me. It provided energy. It just, in a very sort of gentle, a helpful way. The other thing that I feel I have to mention, based on your question, is just my mom, who is just a true warrior, who I feel, I just think like people who are neurodiverse can so easily fall through the cracks of this, sort of factory education system. And so those people require a lot of support and require a lot of love and require mentorship and guidance and stewardship. And my mom, basically the school system was not interested or didn't have the resources to really do anything about it. So my mom put a file together of everything teachers had ever said about me, every grade, every report, everything that she possibly could. And she personally went up against the education system and got me identified, as I was going into the 7th grade. And my grades went from C's and D's to straight A's.
I also had a mom like that. And so, you mentioned how so many schools do kind of have this factory-like process for pushing kids through. I'm curious about how Now that you are an adult and that you've worked in higher education as a professor at some of these universities, how have you taken those experiences and tried to shift what you're doing with your students in those environments?
So I'm a professor at Harvard Medical School, Brigham and Women's Hospital. Actually, my lab is based like physically in the hospital, which is really, really cool because I get to interact with a lot of, I'm not personally a medical doctor, but, I have my PhD and I'm a scientist engineer. So I get to work with a lot of incredible doctors across many different medical fields. And for me, what I've realized kind of after I did, my PhD, I did my postdoc as well. I trained at MIT in Bob Langer's lab, who's actually co-founder of Moderna. And as I was on my path, I kind of found myself repeating what I had learned or what I had experienced. So, kind of this awareness that I had between the second and third grade, I applied every day, really. And I've been trying to, cultivate and improve on it and use it more intentionally. And what I realized is that I sort of looked around at other mentors and how what their process was essentially. And, some of my colleagues, for example, I saw were running their labs almost like military style labs, and they were very productive and they were, making a lot of progress. And some other labs were not like that. And I almost feel like it was hard for me to observe things and say, that's what I'm going to do. What I needed to do was I needed to say, I need to try that on. I need to try on the military style and sort of go with that for a few weeks or whatever, or a month or two, whatever it was, and feel it out. And that definitely wasn't the way I wanted to run my lab. That didn't work very well. But I feel like I needed to try it out so that I could experience it in my own body, in my own mind, and sort of feel the cues out to know whether that was for me or not. And so for my whole life, there's been a lot of trial and error. And even when I learn certain things, I have difficulty applying it unless I am experimenting with many possibilities. And so, that's an example where I was sort of on a path to improve my mentorship skills and figure out what really works for me. Mm-hmm. And what I realized works for me is creating a very conducive environment for people in the lab to be empowered, that I needed to manage my ego, to create a lateral environment in the lab to really see myself as a team member and not at the top of a hierarchy. In doing so, I think that creates this sort of environment of compassion and gratitude, and it creates an environment where people can really work together with a common goal. And so I don't know, I find myself when I meet with people, I've experienced a lot of emotional pendulum swings and energy pendulum swings constantly throughout my life. I think probably associated with my ADHD. And I sort of now, when I am meeting with students or, trainees, I'm trying to figure out where they are in their pendulum swings and trying to be cognizant of what they might be going through in their personal lives. And that to me has been incredibly helpful because I think people see that I really do care.
I really like that idea about the trial and error, because I do think that people feel somehow like they have to find the solution, the way that it's going to work, and that it's always going to work that way, and then it doesn't. And sometimes they get distressed by the fact that it hasn't worked the way that they want it to work out. And sometimes are hesitant to just let's just try it and see if it works a little bit. I mean, not randomly, but just to make that process of evolution to figure out what works. And I think that that's something that is really important, especially when you're working with people in any way, because what works, not only what works for you, but also what works for them is going to vary based on the individual.
Yeah. And I think it really is, it parallels just nature. I mean, we are nature, but kind of looking at how nature, there's no end goal in nature. Mm-hmm. It's always about perturbations, experimentation, testing, gaining insights, learning, evolving, adapting, and just constantly doing that. And so to me, I guess as I was sort of going through the education system and beyond, I just saw these structures that just didn't change. And I couldn't understand why, because I felt like it's almost like I feel my whole life has been about disrupting algorithms, trying on algorithms, seeing what the algorithms are around me that people are living, and it can be with anything, just process, like mentorship process, or how people write papers, like manuscripts, or how people present even in scientific conferences. Like they're all algorithms, and I look around me and I see people sort of doing these algorithms. And so then I feel, okay, I need to take that algorithm and live it, and then really feel, right? Because I feel I get all these cues from my mind and my body and interacting with other people. There's so many cues that, like I'm always looking for cues. Sometimes it gets too extreme. Like if I'm giving a presentation and I look around the room and people are not smiling or look like they're paying attention, I get really nervous because I feel like, oh, I'm not connecting. What can I do? And I start to sort of change too much, of my behavior. So I feel sometimes it can actually go against me, this sort of trying to tune into the cues that are all around me. But generally, it's been very helpful to figure out what really is me. Like people talk a lot about, okay, just be yourself, right? Be yourself. And to me, I'm like, okay, it sounds good, but I don't have a process for being myself. I don't know what that means. And so for me, being myself has really meant trying things on, figuring out what's not me to figure out what is me.
More in a minute.
College can be a big challenge for ADHD students. Balancing classes, assignments, and social life can be overwhelming. But there's a place you should check out that could make a big difference in your child's higher ed experience. Next Step Navigators. It's a personal ADHD college coaching service that provides tailored support to manage time, stay organized, and succeed academically. They have experienced coaches who understand the unique challenges of ADHD and offer practical strategies to keep students on track. They've been able to help students master study skills, improve their focus, and find balance. They guide their clients through challenges and help them grow through every step of their college experience. Their services are accessible from any college campus with virtual sessions, which allow your child to get the help they need regardless of where they are. You can visit nextstepnavigators.com to learn more, and they are working on enrollment for fall 2024. So check it out and grab a spot before they fill up. Go to nextstepnavigators.com. So many high-achieving neurodivergent people really often struggle with imposter syndrome, where they have sometimes this sense of self-doubt that influences everything from their mental health to their relationships. Sometimes that comes from those experiences when you're a child and kind of influences how you develop, or just other experiences that you've had. And so I'm wondering, and it sounds like maybe this is something that you've experienced, at least on occasion. So if you would share maybe a little bit just about that, and then other ways that you've handled it or how it's impacted your life.
I feel like it kind of gotten to this place where I believe if you don't feel like an imposter, you're not really learning as much as you possibly can learn.
I love that. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, early on, I kind of felt like, what am I doing? Is this right? Is this? But there's been so many scenarios where I felt like an imposter, but then, like, if I look back, things worked out really well. And I was able to do things that I never could have imagined. It's almost like it kind of parallels like risk taking. Like the more risks you take within reason, if you have like support around you. And part of it, I feel, is like setting the expectations. Like if I set the expectation that something's going to go well, then I usually set myself up for failure. I'll give you an example. I gave a talk at Stanford on the book that I wrote, Lit, a couple months ago, and I'd never given a talk on it. It's brand new. I've been working on the book for 7 years. So, I was like, okay, clearly I'm going to give it the best shot I possibly can. I'm going to use all my processes. I'm going to put this talk together. But I know from previous experiences that it's not until I get to generation 10 or 15 that I'm really going to be able to crush it and really be comfortable with it and happy with it. And so I went in and I said to myself, this is generation 1.0, right? And there's going to be a 2 and a 3 and a 5 and a 10. And when I did that, so I went in and the talk was okay. Like it wasn't a talk where I said, I loved it. It was amazing. I felt like I connected. I feel I connected at various points, but I feel because I looked at it like an evolving process, it was one of those things where I was looking specifically for the insights that I could gain to make it better for the next time. And I can't tell you how many times I've been on a plane coming home from giving a lecture somewhere, some other city, and I'm like changing the slides on the flight home, right? Because
oh yeah, I hear that.
Right? So just think that that also kind of connects to the imposter syndrome, because if we're doing things new, doing things fresh, doing things we don't feel we're qualified for, if we partner that with looking at things as an evolving process, as generations of things, we really set ourselves up for maximum, not only progress, but I feel like flooding our brains with positive neurotransmitters and feeling really great about it. Because when we transition our focus away from a big kind of, end goal to just learning and to evolving, then it becomes incredibly empowering and rewarding, and we feel great, during throughout the process.
Something I talk with my counseling clients about often is using their momentum, whatever that might be, to help move toward their goals. And this is something that you talk about. So I would love to know more about how you understand momentum and how that can help us and be such a useful strategy towards making that progress.
One of my mantras, I have these kind of simple mantras that I like to sort of just say in my mind from time to time. And actually, I feel like sometimes I actually, I talk to myself out loud. And actually, there was one time when I was at McGill in my undergrad where someone yelled at me across the street. They were like, "Karp, stop talking to yourself." I was like, whoa, okay. So one of the mantras I have is maximize momentum. That's it. Just really, really simple. And it's so easy to start something and then hit a wall and not really know what to do next and feel like immobilized and feel like when all these sort of negative emotions start creeping in and you start kind of digging a hole in a way and sort of closing yourself off. And to me, there are ways to infuse anything with fresh energy to then create more momentum. So for example, in the laboratory, when we invent all kinds of different technologies and bring those technologies into clinical trials. And, the goal is to maximize momentum towards helping patients in the shortest period of time. And, it's one thing to do scientific research. It's another to try and create a product out of it that's going to work, every time for patients. So we hit a lot of walls. And when we hit walls, when things are not going our way, and I think maximize momentum, what often comes to mind is who can we bring into the conversation that isn't part of it, that can provide a new way of thinking? So in other words, it's almost like how can we cultivate more neurodiversity among the team to infuse new thoughts, new ideas, new ways of thinking, new tools, new processes that can provide an infusion of momentum and energy. And it just seems to always work because often someone who hasn't been part of the discussions and the planning and, the advancement of the project, when they come in, they see things a different way. Like you can always find somebody who sees something from a different angle, a different perspective. They have different knowledge base. They have different kind of everything. And when people start providing guidance or advice or ideas, then it invigorates the whole team to now shift from this frame of reference, like, okay, we've hit a dead end and there's no way moving forward, to then changing our thought process, putting it almost on another track, and then you can start going in a different direction. I almost like in my mind, I see like, sometimes at train stations, there's that like circle thing where, there's tracks going in different directions and you can just sort of turn the train to the next one and then it can go off the track in the other direction. I kind of feel it's like that, that we have that possibility in any moment to reframe, to bring in new people and move our train slightly in a different direction so that we can build momentum again and, keep going and taking steps forward.
Yeah, the momentum piece also is part of your whole process with LIT, or life ignition tools. So why don't you tell us more specifically about LIT? I know we've mentioned it a couple of times through the conversation, but and how it can be not only applied to people's lives, but I'd also love to hear your thoughts about how parents and educators might also be able to integrate it when they're supporting young people in their lives.
Absolutely. LIT is about resensitizing our aliveness. It's about intercepting patterns and algorithms to actively think and decide versus just jump in with habitual responses. LIT is a series of on-ramps, simple steps that we can take to be more deliberate in our thoughts and in our actions. And I think that one thing that just really strikes me is considering what we're up against and why we need something like LIT. And so I think there's two major things about what we're up against in today's society. One is there's $900 billion with a B spent on marketing and advertising every year to hijack our attention, to serve us algorithms, direct our thinking, and change essentially what we deem to be important in our lives. That is such a powerful force that we're up against. And it is actually made even more challenging when you consider the other dimension of what we're up against, which is for tens of thousands of years, we were hunter-gatherers, essentially. And we were outside surviving, doing hard work. And our brains and our bodies gravitated towards this low energy state. So anytime we were not outside doing things related to surviving, we were conserving our brain energy and our body energy. And we're at a snapshot right now in evolution where we still have that wiring. We're still wired towards conserving. It's kind of like the energy saver mode. So we gravitate towards a low energy brain state and a low energy body state. It's the reason why we might walk into a room and forget why we walked into the room. It's the reason why we might get in our car, drive from point A to B. We get to point B and we don't even remember the route that we took. It's the reason why we might be eating a meal and we get to the end and we can't even remember a flavor that we had. The reason why we lose our keys and then find it's in our jacket pocket, or, all these sort of examples, like our brains gravitate to this low energy state. And by the way, for our bodies as well, it's not natural to exercise. It doesn't make sense from an evolutionary perspective to exercise because we were outside doing the hard work and we were trying to conserve our body, so to exercise and not have it relate to survival just wouldn't make sense. So when you couple these things with this $900 billion worth of, marketing and advertising, so when our brains gravitate to a low energy brain state, it makes us susceptible to misinformation, to just leading other people's algorithms, to assuming that the algorithms we're being served are there to help us. But really, who's ever behind the algorithms, often they're there to monetize things and to gain power. A lot of it's money driven. And so others are not necessarily operating in our best interests. And so we need tools to intercept those patterns, to really make deliberate decisions in our lives. And that's where LIT comes in. And I think our culture, for example, atomizes our attention. It flattens our imagination. It flattens our curiosity. It flattens our senses. And so LIT is really all about bringing in fresh energy into our lives to live in our senses and to really give us the fuel to realize that we're at the switches and we can make decisions. And kind of like what we were saying before, anytime that we do something intentional in our lives, it feels amazing. And we can literally do that all day long just by making these incremental steps forward.
Yeah. I like the idea of the incremental steps. I feel like that makes it very approachable and manageable. It's like you don't have to do it all at once, just little by little.
Yeah, I'll give you some examples. Like, for example, there's a tendency when we're eating to go on our phones, right? And be entertained with whatever's there, TikTok or YouTube, watch a movie, whatever it is. But in many ways, we're almost losing an opportunity to sensitize our aliveness, to sensitize our senses. So what I like to do almost every meal, but just as an incremental step forward, what if we just pick one meal a day where the goal was to get in touch with the flavors of whatever we're eating? And sometimes what I'll do is I'll close my eyes with not every bite, but every whatever, 5th bite or 10th, whatever it is, I'll close my eyes and just sort of, and it's amazing how the experience changes when you close your eyes, when you're eating. And it's not just about having that experience. We're actually rewiring our brains. We're improving our ability to sense flavors. And so if you do it for a number of times, you become more sensitive to the flavors. And so you're essentially deepening your experience. Another thing that I do is I walk around the neighborhood and I cycle through my senses. So as I'm walking the dogs, I'll look at the trees and I'll look at the texture of the bark on the trees and the shape of the trunks of the trees and the branches. And I'll look at, I'll say sight, and I'm just focused on what I'm seeing. And I'll look at the leaves and the clouds. And then I say hearing, and I just listen for the birds and, other animals. And I'm listening for the rustling of the leaves. And then I'll say touch, and I'll just feel the clothes on my skin and my heels hit the ground as I'm walking and the wind against my face. And as I've done this, again, there's sort of like the experience of the moment, which is pretty interesting, actually, because I feel more connected to whatever I'm doing. But as I've done this more and more, I feel like I'm deepening my experiences. I feel it. Like when I walk by a tree now, it catches my gaze. Like I'm now looking at it. My eyes, I noticed before, would jump all around when I was outside. I'm either deep in thought with my head down, or I'm up and my eyes are going all over the place, almost like on a screen, like looking for all these little flashes of whatever, headlines or whatever it is. But now when I look at a tree, it's like I kind of stare at it as I'm walking by, and I'm sort of connecting more with it. And these are the types of things that we can do. Another example is in the day, I find like I'm very impulsive. I interrupt people when they're speaking. And so I could say, okay, I just one time, today when I, wake up in the morning, I'm going to make it a goal of when I feel like interrupting someone, I'm just going to try to let it go. Just once, just once. And just doing that once is so empowering. It just feels amazing to let it go. And what I also find amazing is like a minute or two later, I forgot what I was even going to say, what I was going to interrupt with. So, and it's almost like it didn't really matter. And so I just think, there's all these little steps that we can take throughout the day that can just awaken us and, help us captivate this awe that's all around us and have more gratitude for everything, and especially for the machinery that we all have. Nobody can take away our neuroplasticity, our ability to rewire our brains, our senses, our ability to sense the world and have deep experiences, and this incredible prefrontal cortex that we have, this front part of the brain that just allows us to think about thinking and plan and reason and do emotional regulation. And it just, when you start to do this, you really realize that we are at the switches and we can make these small changes every day, and our lives become so enriched, and it contributes to our mental health and our wellness. And, I find like I start eating better and I start exercising more, and it's all, the goal for me wasn't to eat better or exercise more. It was to just get more in touch with the machinery that I have. And when I start doing that, I have such gratitude for it. I want to treat myself better. And so it all kind of flows out of that.
Jeff Karp, author of Lit, Life Ignition Tools, use nature's playbook to energize your brain, spark ideas, and ignite action. Thanks so much for your time today, Jeff.
Thank you.
You know that feeling that you have when you're on a roller coaster and it's going up that first big hill? You hear that click, click, click of the chain as it slowly pulls the cars to the crest of the first hill? Once you get to the top, one by one, the cars begin the descent and gather momentum and allow that momentum to carry them through the rest of the coaster. Once the momentum takes over, none of the other up hills, loops, or spirals require the same amount of effort as that first hill. I know how hard it is to get that momentum going for some of our neurodivergent brains, but recognizing the patterns of our own peaks and valleys of energy, the climbs that take more effort, and the drops where we can just roll along are important. The more flexibility we have to go along with that energy, rather than working against it, the better we feel and the more we'll get done. Maybe that means you're a night owl or a morning person. Maybe you need to do the easy tasks first before you tackle the hard ones. The more aware you are of these traits, the better you'll be able to work with your brain instead of against it. I'm Emily Kircher-Morris. I'll see you next time on the Neurodiversity Podcast.
This episode was brought to you by Next Step Navigators, where you can take your ADHD coach to college with you. Next Step Navigators can support you from any campus. Visit nextstepnavigators.com. Thanks again to Jeff Karp. If you'd like to find out more about the LIT program or check out any of his work, you'll find links in the show notes. Also, if you want to join discussions about this episode, about any other subject you find interesting, or if you just have a question you'd like to ask of our members, join the Neurodiversity Podcast Advocacy and Support Group on Facebook. I'll link that in the show notes as well. Our host is Emily Kircher-Morris. Our office manager and social media director is Krista Brown. I'm the executive producer, Dave Morris. For all of us, thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time. This is a service of the Neurodiversity Alliance.